Great. Well, welcome everyone. Lovely to see you all here. Thanks for making the time on a Tuesday afternoon. My name's Giles Gillette from NASCEE, and welcome to our next series in Tuesdays in the Trenches, our next episode, sorry. So today we're going to be hearing from Gail Campbell, who's the CEO of Xenix Foundation, and Judy Tate, who's leads KICP Inanda Seminary in KZN. And both of them have got a lot of experience in the education sector. Viwe is going to put the bios in the chat. Have you been able to? Because last week I struggled. Viwe, you've been able to put it in the chat?
I'm still figuring it out, but during the course of the episode, we'll have the bios.
we'll put their bios in the chat for you to have a look at. But I think, you know, Gail brings a perspective of having been and being in the funding space for many years, but having come from a social worker environment herself. And so she's got deep experience in the development sector. And Judy, who was a school teacher, a school principal, and now running KICP, which essentially is around building and is about teacher development and building skills within teachers. And they'll bring in bits and pieces of their expertise as they speak. But I think I'm really here to welcome you all and say thanks for checking in, and we're really enjoying these conversations. And I'm going to hand over to Nicole Mostert, who's our kind of chairs these conversations, to take it forward, and then Viwe will be working with her. So I'm going to hand over to you, Nicole, to get started, and thanks to Gail and Judy for your time.
Awesome. No problem at all. Thanks again to everyone for joining, and to NASCEE. And again, I echo Giles' sentiments, Judy and Gail. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I love these conversations because I'm not from the education sector at all, but I am working in the education sector now. So I love learning from you ladies. So please give us as much info as you feel like it. We've got not a very strict time constraint. And I'm just going to jump straight in with one of our first questions, which is, what motivated each of you to work in this education sector of ours? And I will start with Gail, if you don't mind to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. And NASCEE team, thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Nicole. I saw the question and had to think about it, because I didn't come into the sector coming into work in education. Okay, and perhaps I should just reflect from the time I was at school. I always knew I was going to work with people, and so that's the first. But when I came into Xenix, I came in more with the experience of managing a foundation, you know, and coming in with that experience. And I remember after my first board meeting, driving home and phoning my daughter and saying, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to go back and study. I don't know enough about education. But having said that, I've learned so much about Xenix. I won't call myself about education. I won't call myself an education expert. But what's motivated me to stay at Xenix and to stay working in the education sectors is about it's about being my own learning, and it's about the impact that you can make through education. I know it sounds cliched, but I do think that when you think about development, it does start with the very firm grounding that you need in education. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Judy.
My story is almost the polar opposite to Gail's. So I'm almost like from the cradle to the grave, because I'm still working full time. From a small child, I wanted to be a teacher. A neighbor had a chalkboard, and we used to write on the chalkboard and mark. And all I wanted to do was to mark and be a teacher. And in the years before ballpoint pens and Tipp-Ex, I used to sit on Sunday afternoons with my grandmother before calculators, helping her to add her mark books up, because both my grandmothers were teachers. And those were the days, if you made a mistake, you had to have Jick to take the fountain pen out of the page, and you could see the mistakes. And it was all I ever wanted to be. And later, all I wanted to be was a maths teacher. And when I went to university, I went to do a BSc. And it was a very patriarchal society in the early 70s when I went to university, and the commerce faculty was entirely male, but there were 3 girls in the commerce faculty doing CAs, and my brothers were studying for a CA. And I said to my mother, why didn't you encourage me to do a CA? She said, we would never have dared to. And so it was really all I wanted to do. I've met amazing people who have really reshaped my life since I started in the sector sort of 50 years ago. And when I was pondering on the question, I realized there were 3 people, and ironically, their names both start with J, and so does mine, who taught me more education than anything else in terms of experience. And the one was in the early 80s teaching me about democratic management, when it was such an authoritative sector, education in those years, and collaboration, which I actually later went on to do my master's in. It was still not what happens today. The second was someone who just really conscientized me for justice and mercy and humility. And the third was someone who really enhanced my consciousness on the humanity of people. So since the 80s, I've worked in what in this country was called Bantu education or Black kid education, not trying to come from a privileged position and working with underprivileged people, not reaching up and trying to pull people up, and not trying to rescue anybody, but going directly to places and people where there is suffering and trying to build there. So yeah, that's been my education journey, which I'm still full-time involved in. Love it to bits, and I don't quite know what I'll do when maybe I have to stop one day.
Awesome, thank you. I cannot believe that Jick comment. I was today years old. Given the fact that we have a woman focus or a female focus, I wanted to know, and you, Judy, you spoke about, kind of growing up in the education sector, or that being your career trajectory, and Gail, you getting into the education sector similar to myself in a different way. But what have been generally some of the leadership challenges that you've encountered in your career? And that can be just as a leader in general, and possibly as a woman, if you've encountered any specific challenges.
Maybe let me kick off, and I suppose it's also reflecting on where you left off about, and that's our age, Judy, and where we all started. I definitely think that we've had to face issues of establishing oneself and establishing yourself as a leader in a very male-dominated world of leaders around you, and recognizing that I didn't have to emulate anything that was typically known to be as good leadership or as male leaders, and having to find my very authentic self and what kind of leader I was going to be. So I think that's been a challenge, and that's the way I've thought about how I could be that kind of leader that really, and that came from a values base, rather than looking at leadership from a hierarchical position. I think that's one of the challenges that we've had to navigate from being leaders in those early days, where your typical leaders around you were male.
And is that true? Judy, we can go straight to you. I just want to know, is that true even in what feels like a predominantly female education sector specifically? I don't know if that's an accurate comment or a fair comment to make.
I don't know that it is anymore. Certainly when I started teaching, you know, even your salaries were different if you were a female to a male. And if you fell pregnant, you had to immediately go onto temporary staff. You were no longer permanent staff, etc. So it was very different in back in the days of the Rinderpest. And I'm not so sure that it's like that anymore. In fact, I really don't think that it is. Perhaps in certain circles. I think if I look at the challenges that I've had, generally a lot of them I've brought on myself. I've had death threats, I've had things written on the pathway, Tate must die, and strikes. And often when I've had to want to run from the present moment, I've had really wise mentors around me, and people that have really spoken into my life very firmly, like, can't you manage being unjustifiably accused? And then you think, yes, I can, you know, and you get to the conclusion too quickly. You don't allow processes to unfold, and you think, oh, okay, yes, maybe I do that, you know. So I found that that's really been helpful in the education sector, and those have been both male and female mentors that I've had. And I think education is just so relational. It's all about people, which is, for anyone who's listening that's not an educationist, that's why teachers need holidays all the time, because it's not like they're researchers or technicians or things like that. They're engaging with people and little people, you know, a lot of the time. So I think the big challenge and one of the big shifts for me too, even as a leader, is moving away from the results of your school and the IQ to knowing that actually the most important thing is the SEL and the EQ of the people in your school, on your staff, and the children that are in the school. And I think that that's a big shift, particularly in a country like ours, where there seems to be such emphasis on matric results, and everybody knows that it's the incorrect emphasis, but everybody goes there and everybody plunges towards sort of propping that up, which is really not gender-based at all. So for me, that was a bigger shift from IQ to EQ than from male to female. And the years blur, you know, when I'm in my 51st year of education now. So you just get very wrapped up with where you are. And yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
go for it, please.
Yeah, no, I want to build on what Judy was saying, and I suppose the flip side of the challenges and what kind of advice you'd give to leaders. And yes, there's, you know, if you think of any leadership role, there's technical competencies depending on the area that you work on. There's leadership and management competencies that you need. But for me, biggest area, and it was said to me like this: you've got to know yourself to be able to lead others. Okay, you've got to know who you are. You got to start to begin to understand what your blind spots are, what your triggers are, and be able to be open to feedback. And if there's one thing I've invested in terms of my journey of being a leader, is that investing in understanding more of who I am, understanding, what I can bring in, and being reflective. And that's been, I suppose, the part of leadership that I'd like to emphasize, the ability to know who you are to be able to lead others. And also, just to echo what Judy was saying, if I think about my leadership, it's largely been relational. It's been less about being the cleverest person in the room on any educational matter, but it's been about how to build relationships and how to work with people that I have developed as in how I've been a leader.
You really nailed it, Gail. It's that self-awareness before you can lead.
Yeah.
And they say that the new 3 R's in education are not reading, writing, arithmetic, but they are resilience, relational, and reflection. Those are the 3 things that if children leave school with those things, they'll be able to do most things.
Yeah, I mean that. I mean, it's also knowing that it's also quite a lonely job, because yes, you do carry accountability, you do carry mandates. And when I say I've been invested in that part of my development, it's not only whether it was formal coaching or whether it was any kind of program I went on, but it's really, really, really important to have a network of support around you. And that can come from in your immediate family environment, from your friends, but from other peers that you can talk to, you can reflect with, you can talk through problems, and that's really important in your role as a leader.
Thank you both for those responses. I actually wanted to jump in with the question that I feel is quite relevant, I think, to some of the reflections you've been sharing now. We've already started sort of touching on the important aspects of leadership that, especially I think, young people coming into the sector can take note of. So the importance of knowing yourself, knowing your blind spots. Judith, you spoke about the importance of mentors. So I wanted to ask you both what advice you would give young women, particularly who are starting their careers in education and social impact. I think especially given the different journeys you've both taken to get to education. Gail, I don't know if you maybe want to start.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've mentioned one, and that's actually having a network of people that you can rely on, and people that can from different. I mean, I've got someone who I can get some support on HR matters. I've got people that I can go to when I'm struggling with a matter related to education. So that's important for any leader to have to build a kind of network that you can and rely on. I mean, the second important thing is that you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay even in the room with the team that you're leading, to have the ability, the courage to say, I don't know, and I think that's more authentic and more respectful than rather trying to position yourself as knowing everything. The third, and that's also modeling, being able to say, I've made a mistake. Thinking about it, this is how I would have done things differently. Because if you model that behavior with the team that you lead, you allowing people also can we call it the freedom, you empowering them to say, as I walk my career journey, it's inevitable that you're going to make some mistakes. You're going to have the benefits of hindsight and think I would have done that differently. So not thinking you need to know everything, and being able to say you don't know. And the second is having the humility also to be open and model that behavior where you've actually reflected and sharing how you would have done things differently.
And making the mistakes doesn't stop.
Yeah.
I mean, the lifelong learner is a cliche thing, but it really, really is an education. And I've made quite a big mistake in the last couple of weeks. And you just think, goodness me, when are you going to learn, but hopefully I have learned this time. But I think that your words are sound, Gail, to anyone entering the career or the sector, not necessarily the career, but I want to say, become a teacher. There is no finer career. You can do absolutely everything that any other career contains in being a teacher. You can be creative, you can be legal, you can write, you can be a historian, you can be a researcher, but more than that, you can speak up for the voices that aren't being heard, people that perhaps aren't as eloquent as educators often are. You can, and often if you help people in their pain, it offers new vision for them out there. It really is the most wonderful career. But somebody said to me early on when I had my first principal post, she said, please tell me you won't employ anyone who doesn't love children. And it sounds trite, but back in the day when there were very few ways for people to get qualified, becoming a teacher was one of them. You could get a government loan to become a teacher. And people did take that route, not because they wanted to be a teacher, but because it was a means of getting qualified. And I understand that completely. And we're so grateful for those that have developed the passion for children and teaching, despite their original route. But if you don't like children and you know you don't like children, don't get into the sector, because it is about creating new opportunities, especially in this country, where people just haven't had these opportunities before. There may be equality, but there is not equity. And it's walking that journey, with all that Gail has said, to help you walk it, not alone, because it can be lonely.
So powerful. Thank you both. That was really great. I think a very important question that needs to be asked is, what leadership capabilities does the education sector most urgently need today? And I especially love, Judy, how you brought up that, we've got these new R's, resilience, relational, and reflection. And it just shows how the landscape and the context is just changing rapidly, and leadership capabilities and competencies, etc., are needing to adjust, or do they need to? What is lacking? So over to you both. Perhaps I could start with you, Judy.
It's like you've landed on my pet peeve when people say, when I was at school. Because schools are not like they were, certainly when I was at school. And I stopped heading a school 5 years ago, and schools are not like the schools were 5 years ago. It's like an exponential trajectory that's happening at the moment. And so I want to answer that very carefully of what does education need? And I want to caution people who think that they may be the gift to education, and these are my skills, and I've got a passion to help. Yes, there definitely is a place for that. There are many ways that people can be involved, and there are many sectors. I look at the problem that we've got in this country at the moment, and a lot of emphasis is being put on foundational literacy and numeracy. And this country has done an enormous amount of work in that area. The resources out there are magnificent, and yet we still have the problem. And so it's not a case of, well, here are the resources, or you need me, or whatever. It's really being able to try and identify what the problem is. And I'm grateful that there are many wise brains looking at these things now. So yeah, I think I don't want to say that it is foundational literacy and numeracy. Of course, that's a problem. I don't want to say it's technology and AI. I don't want to say that's a problem. Of course, it is a problem, but it's also a huge asset to education and to teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to identify anything in particular, except the whole aspect of things being community-centered. So it is doing what you can where you are, and humanity-centered, and networking where one can in those centers. And if you'll forgive me, I had written down here something that John Wesley said centuries ago: do all the good you can by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you can. And so if one uses that as a measure without saying, well, I'm God's gift to the society, I've got what they want, you know, I can tell you what my passions are, but everybody out there in the education sector is working in different areas, and everyone is as valuable as every other one.
Yeah. Nicole, I'll probably approach the question from a different angle, and I'm approaching it from the point of view of leadership and leading organizations that are active in the education sector, rather than approaching it from the context of being in a school or the content areas that need attention. And if I'm thinking of leaders today and what we need in this sector that we're working in, I think that the ability to be able to collaborate and work with others, so that you have your organizational base, but leaders today must be able to understand and know that they're going to have to work more collaboratively across organizations. And the second is, and I mean, this is particularly interesting in education. Education is hierarchical. Okay, and if you think of how schools are set up, and if you think of just how the system works, and by and large, how government works, it's very hierarchical. And I think for us that sit in the non-profit sector, to actually challenge those paradigms, and actually going back to, you need relational leaders, and you need leaders who are very low ego. To drive an organization and to lead an organization, and especially in education. And Judy, you've spoken very passionately about education, and you have to have you have to work from a low ego place, and that low ego is also going to have help with collaborating with others. I mean, the third is, and this has been something that, and Xenex has really had to think about the role we play as a funder, which inherently carries power. That's it, you can't get away from it. The fact that you're managing a resource, and that resource is money, and that gives you an incredible amount of power. And how do you use that? How do you, first of all, acknowledge that and be constantly mindful of that? And how do you work with that more positively? And to understand that we've got to have, in leadership, we've got to have different voices in the room, and different voices, understanding that when you're working with people bring in different types of expertise and different types of experiences. Money is just one resource. And that's why the kind of leadership that I've tried to bring in Xenex is actually to be open to hearing other voices and bringing other voices into the room to guide us, to learn from in the work we do. And I think the fourth, education is hierarchical and also conservative. And but within that, you've got to constantly be thinking of the what next, the exploration, and trying not to get stuck into the way things are done and the way things the way used to be done. You have to have a mind always open to explore new ideas. So I've more taken it from leading organizationally rather than looking at it in the context of a school or content. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. I mean, off the back of what you said, all the different voices and perspectives are so valuable. And I don't know if you see, I'm writing notes galore here on my page. I'm learning so much. So I love that we could get these various perspectives on the question. I would love to, at this stage, open up for a bit of a question and answer session. So if there is anybody online that would like to ask Judy or Gail a particular question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question. You can also type it into the chat as you prefer. Just check here quickly. Yes, Paul. Paul, if you don't mind to say where you're from, just in one line before you ask your question. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Paul Rink, and I'm from FedSAS in the lovely KZN and getting very wet at the moment. Just a question, Gail and Judith. I think I've met Judith in person. I've spoken to Gail before, but maybe give us a bit of a quick synopsis. I really love your walk down memory lane and the experiences that you've had. They've really been great. But maybe specifically with regards to funding in the sector. We talk about how to get funds, how to obtain funds. How has that changed? I keep telling everybody I'm a newbie at this business within FedSAS, but how has it changed over the last, say, 15, 20 years? We know there's significant charismatic changes every now and again, but how has it generally changed from when you first got involved in this NGO sector to now?
Judy, maybe I can take it from the point of view of being in the area of philanthropy, working. I think what has changed is that, first of all, it was very transactional. That in the way in the way that foundations engaged with NGOs, it was also very reactive in that the typical approach would be that funders would have a strategy and largely wait for proposals to come in and make decisions, and that's particularly putting you in a very powerful position when you've got that control over the resource that you're managing. How I've seen it changed, and I'm going to say it's changed, and I'm also going to say what's a challenge that we all have to grapple with. The fact that we're talking about a number of things now. We're talking about more collaboration. We're talking about looking at how we're thinking about scale. Even when we're innovating and piloting, we have scale in mind. And the third thing we're talking about, how does government lead? Because government has the mandate for education. Now that introduces a whole new sets of variables in this funding relationship. And I think we need to have more talks about that. And when I'm with funders, I've said the fact that we're talking like that places a different challenge on the nonprofit sector that's seeking funding. If we're saying collaborate more, if we're saying we're going to be working with government at scale, what is it that we need to be thinking about how we can support the nonprofit sector that is seeking funds? And just to throw out some example, and I said it, I think NASCEE, and this is something for NASCEE, to actually encourage more of that dialogue, because it has changed the nature of that relationship of applying to fund for funding. Collaboration takes time and takes money. So if funders are saying to NGOs, you need to collaborate, how do we stimulate that? How do we encourage that? How do we fund that? Okay. If we're saying we need to work at scale, what does it mean for organizations that are smaller? What does it mean for them to think about how to work at scale? And it's a different funding model that thinks beyond just about the project, but thinks about building internal capacity, building systems within NGOs. And I'd really like to have more conversations saying that that's the change in the way we're working as a sector, funders and partners who implement, and we're highly dependent on each other. But if we're saying that's the change, how do we navigate that together, and what does it take from each of us? I hope I've answered that.
Shall I follow? Gail, you have expressed the issues well. On the receiving end, I think NGOs are learning to collaborate more, but it's very difficult to switch from competition to collaboration when the market seems to only have so much money for NGOs. And am I going to do it at the expense of someone else, or are we able to convince a funder that together we are stronger? And I'm so grateful for the funders that are open to that. But as you said, collaboration takes time, and we've got organizations to run. And I know, Paul, your question probably came from that. And you've got breadwinners in your organization. And so we're trying to dismiss the competitiveness with funders, or the favor with funders, or relationships with funders, or trying to say, well, what the funders think should be funded now. And I think that that's where the biggest switch has happened, that the funders are collaborating with the people on the ground who are seeing the issues and talking to the funders, and they're open to that. Whereas in the past, I think and I don't know if it was in your early days, Gail, where the funders would say, well, we're going to fund this or we're going to fund that.
Yeah.
And we would all just scurry around and try and match what was on offer. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think that that we're not working against each other, we're working with each other, but it's still a sector, particularly in our country at the moment, where the biggest partner in education, as you said, is the government. And then KwaZulu-Natal, where I hang out, the KZN DOE does not have funding and finance for a lot of professional development, which is what we're doing. So we're so beholden on the generosity of grantees to fund the work with teachers, which is what we do, teacher development organization. But I think that, and I mean, when just declaring it all, so it's ironic that NASCEE haven't even spoken to Gail and I independently, but put us together, probably not knowing that for about 20 years we've worked on projects together. And even in that, I've seen a journey and a change where the philanthropy wants to discuss the issue with the implementer to get the best possible solution for it. So there is that change. But in terms of money for the sector and tightness for the sector, if you want to be a leader in the NGO sector, you've got to learn to live with a brick in your tummy.
Yeah. Well, powerful stuff. Are there any other questions online? I'll give it 10 or 15 seconds. And we can move on to some of our additional questions. No, nothing online. Viwe, over to you.
So actually, Paul's question perfectly aligns with what we wanted to touch on a bit more, which is collaboration and what effective collaboration looks like. So, I mean, even within NASCEE, we've just concluded our collaboration and action series where we were highlighting some effective collaboration examples across the sector. And Gail, in your response to Paul's question, you touched on, moving from having a transactional relationship with NGOs and funders to rather looking at collaboration, looking at scale, and looking at government leadership. And Judy as well, I think you really came in punching with the idea of how do we shift from competition to collaboration. So I think in light of those sentiments, I wanted to ask you both, what do you feel, especially as leaders within your organizations, what do you think effective collaboration looks like across NGOs, government, and funders?
I'm happy to kick off, and some of this I actually learned from Gail, and that is that we were working with government. And not despite government or against government. The money for building the education systems is largely in their coffers. And we're grateful for the generosity of philanthropies and corporate, etc., that are funding in public-private partnerships. But they are our biggest funder. They own the buildings that we work in, and they fund the teachers that we're working with very often. And so I think that that's been a big shift. That it's not that they're just out on the side and we're doing their work. It's not like that at all anymore. And I think the vulnerability in the sector is open. This is where we need help. Can you help, etc. I think that's really been very helpful. But I just want to share before Gail comes in one very new experience that we've had in the last 6 months, and that is on preparing a proposal for some work. We were actually offered support from the funder in preparing our proposal. Everybody who was doing it was offered that support, and I've never had that before, because then you're getting the ideas from both sides that this is what they're looking for, this is what we're offering, and how can the two get together for the best result. And for me, that's just a whole new step into working in the sector.
If I can look at what effective collaboration looks like, I think because we all talk about collaboration and we all talk about partnership and trying to codify what that actually means. I think the first is a values base, and I was talking about having all the parties in the room and being respectful that the different parties bring different levels of expertise and experiences, and perhaps having that as a leveling of the playing field. I think the second part to collaboration is putting the time and the money to actually encourage reflection and learning. That's quite an important part of having effective collaboration. And I suppose I'm speaking when I say that I speak to funders and talk about what it takes, the funding that it takes to make a collaboration work. The third aspect is putting funding aside for setting up, I don't want to call it rules of engagements, but charters, because if there's no conflict in a collaboration, then you're not collaborating, because you're bringing organizations together that have different organizational cultures, different protocols, different mandates, and you're bound to face conflicts along the way. Conflicts in the way you do things, conflicts around the way you think an intervention should be designed, and putting some resources around building trust and building relationships in that collaboration. Someone asked, would it take for the nonprofit sector to work more collaboratively? And I really, Judy, I want to echo what you're saying. The way funding works inherently creates a competitive environment. It's the way that works. And I think the time is right. And let me just, if a group of literacy organizations working in KZN started off a conversation and said that we think this is how we can work better together, and came to a funder for funding those collaborative discussions before you even get to an intervention. I think the time is right to engage funders about how to stimulate because you say time is it's a cost for you as a nonprofit, and I think that's where we should be going to, thinking about organizations who are reliant on funding. That's the nature of being a nonprofit, but also want to look at how you can collaborate more. And I think this is taking it maybe a step further, that we can start thinking about it, thinking of not only collaboration around doing an intervention together. Is there something we can start thinking about, economies of scale around admin, around systems, around shared offices, to start having those kinds of conversations now when we think of making collaboration real and tangible and like active? Yeah.
Well, let it be noted that we've already started that before Gail said that. But because the funders have done this. The funders have got together and they are talking to each other in various consortia. And I mean, one of our biggest areas of working is initial teacher education, and there's an initial teacher education funder group. And so quite a few implementing partners, NGOs, have said, we've got to get our act together and be collaborating and then talking with the funders, because it was quite unnerving at first when the funders are all together, so they all know who's funding what and about your different organizations. Said that's good, they're stronger, and then they come out with something that they're going to do. And so we have started to do that, Gail. We have started to get people working together to say, how can we do this? How can we pitch differently? How can we work differently? How can we address the problems differently? Perhaps not exactly as you're describing with admin offices and that kind of thing, but just in terms of our work. Sometimes you go into spaces and places and there are multiple people working in the same space, and there are other spaces where nobody's working. And much as you try with, the dashboard and things like that, it doesn't always work like that. So it is something that we have started to do as NGOs, and NASCEE is a good forum for that as well. So thank you for confirming that the route that we're going down is good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to those of you who have popped some comments and questions into the chat. Just being mindful of time, I am going to hand over to Giles just for some closing thoughts and some reflection possibly, and just to wrap it up for us. Thanks, Giles.
Thanks, Nicole. And I realized I didn't actually introduce you at the beginning, so my apologies for that. Nicole is a kind of colleague / friend. She works for Maskew Miller, and has had lots of experience in this space. So thanks for being our moderator. And Viwe is works at UCT most of her time, but has also been doing some contract work at NASCEE. So Viwe, thanks for holding that role. So to Gail and Judy, thank you very much. I think these conversations, what I'm noticing is it's helping us not just with leadership but also strategy. I think it's getting me to think. I think last week there was quite a big push for how we're showing up as leaders with courage and speaking more about truth to power and being more honest about the reality of what we're facing and what we're seeing in partnership with government. And today I've really taken away this sense of how do we do collaboration better, and what's my role in driving that, not because I have to do it, because I think that's how a lot of organizations are feeling at the moment, is that they have to do collaboration because they're being told to. Whereas I think what I'm walking away with is that I need to do collaboration because it's going to make my organization stronger, and more impactful in how we partner with government. And that's really our role in the sector. So I think getting time with people that have been in the space a long time is very, very is a real privilege. So thank you to you both for sharing some of these thoughts that you've had, and as you've walked along your journey. And NASCEE's thinking about how do we deepen and create more exposure for these. So we might be coming back to you. We're very grateful, but I'm sure there is more to discuss. And I see some of the questions, but I think many of them have been answered through what has been shared. But I think from NASCEE's side, to you both, thank you very much. To Nicole for holding the role, and Viwe for organizing things behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. Thanks very much. And to everyone who came onto the call, I hope you've got some value. And we will be continuing with these. So please look out for the next episode, and deepening them and thinking about how we can bring more insights to you in the sector as we all try and grapple with these big challenges to put solutions that can scale and really make a difference for our learners. And I also love that, Judy, you brought us back into the classroom. It was wonderful. So thank you for that. Yes, enough for me. Nicole, Viwe, we done? Is there anything else? Okay, great. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye. Bye.